Hey everybody, welcome back. It's more fun at the Red Barn with the Ferrari Swap 914. In the last episode, you got to watch me hurt myself and bleed all over the place and watch us throw out a perfectly good exhaust system. In this episode, I'm going to wrap up the radiator mount and we got to figure out what we're going to do for the exhaust on this car. Oh, and the kitties, we're all going to miss them. They're settling in beautifully at Morty's, and so I hope you're okay as we move back to episodes that are all focused on cars. Well, at least until we check in on them again. Enjoy. All right, time to wrap up this radiator mount, and here's the other side getting fit and tacked, and that's all done. But here's the acid test, which is, you know, trying to figure out square in these old chassis is always a thrill. So what I figured was something like a suspension mount pickup point would probably be a good thing, and so I'm just going for that. And I just set it so that, you know, all the way to the front of that, it barely contacts the back of this. And if I do it over here, it barely contacts the back there too. So we have it down to 0.001 of accuracy. Okay, so now pull this out and get the final pieces in there and get the whole thing welded up. I think it's always a good idea to do a final test fit before final welding. And so I just dropped the radiator in, and you can see I wanted this to be lined up with the edge of that. And it's pretty much lined up with the edge of that on both sides. And if you look really carefully, you can see that there's a gap here, and there's a little gap across there, and there's not here because it's leaned forward. But I didn't mention this, but while I was welding the base mounts to the frame, the rectangular part of the frame, I spaced it off by about 1/8 of an inch to make room for the foam seal, because I didn't want to forget that that was going to be in there trying to compress. So I bought myself a little bit more space. So there's the fit, and you know, again, it's just clecoed in, but that thing's not going anywhere, as I say. So I'm really happy with that. So the final bit of fabbing on this radiator mount was to make up a template of a brace that I just folded and then trimmed to shape. And that is, it ends up being this corner piece right here. And I just have to knock the corner off of that piece to clear the base. And now I just want to final weld that, and then this mount will be done. And we can just worry about getting the fasteners put in to get it locked down in the chassis. Those welds were all edge, you know, seam welds and those kind of joints. This is going to be a plug weld. So there's the puddle in the middle, and then I just walk out to the edge until that edge drops down into the puddle. And I just did a fuse like that. That is that. All right, so for fasteners for this, I've decided to use rib nuts for these upper components. And then for the lower components down here, I'm gonna use these threaded inserts. I'm just gonna drill a hole and drop this down in there and just weld it to the chassis. Right there is a fully installed, fully welded radiator mount. So yay, that's done. Okay, we're back on the exhaust. Martin's back. He's working on the X pipe, so he's gonna just TIG away here. Okay, so Martin got the X all tacked up while I was finishing up the radiator mount. And now the question is, we got to hold this in place in the car exactly where we want it. And you can see, obviously, tons of trimming and where it's going to get cut and figuring out how to connect it into everything. Martin, over the years, has drilled it into my head that what you need to do is fixture everything in a repeatable way so you can work on it, take it out, tweak it, put it back in, and know you're getting it in exactly the same place. So, I have done this. First thing I did was take a piece of plate, drill and tap it, a little precise calculating, and some oddball spacers. And what this is it allows me to take the X and completely locate it down onto this thing. And it essentially locks it onto this plate, right? There it is, locked on. Little piece of Delrin kind of plastic here, and this is a hex that's pushed right into that corner. So I've got a plate attached to an X. Then I took some 1x1 and made this contraption. And what this does is it clamps onto the engine cradle and reaches back below the transaxle, because, surprise, surprise, the X is not going to go on top of the transaxle, it eats up way too much trunk space. It's going to go under the transaxle. And yes, I got to work out heat shielding and all that. But what this is now is it's a rail system, because we aren't exactly sure of exactly where everything needs to be, but this plate is exactly the same space here. So once this thing is clamped onto the car, I have it'll be squared to the car. This thing's squared to itself. So I now have an easy way to get these in, to get the X under the trans completely square without having to look at anything. And it's a rail system. So obviously it's not going to move that much, but because we don't know exactly where is the optimal space for this, I now can get this into the car, slide this thing back and forth, and it'll clear the trans by a bit. So as we're fitting everything, it's like, okay, cut number 1, let's say it's got to be right here. Now we know that. What do we do? Well, we just lift this up, it clears the underneath of the transaxle, and it pulls right out. Put it back in, and then yes, of course, we'll mark where the repeatable location is so we can pull this thing in and out. And I'm telling you, man, it doesn't go anywhere. It slides nicely, but boy, oh boy, once this thing's down in the rail, it is locked in place. So I'm going to go put this in the car and show you how it works. And if we go under the car, here you can see it in place. So it's clamped to the front cross member of the engine cradle, and then there's a spacer here to get it to drop down at an angle that provides enough clearance between the top of the X, the bottom of the transmission. So then this is the other issue, is this thing's rubber, so it's going to need to get heat shielded. But here's how it works, right? So with the rail system in here, this thing can slide back and forth and stay completely square to the car. Here I'm trying to twist it, and so it stays completely square to the car, and we can play with that spacer for up and down movement. And we can mark it once we know where we want it, and this is completely repeatable, right? And then, as it's being worked with, when you need to take it out and cut it or trim anything, it just lifts out of the rail system, and there it is. And the little slider stays right with it. You make your adjustment, go to put it back in, and it drops right into the rail system. And again, fore aft, you can play with. So, pretty happy with that. Now to start connecting the dots. All right, and there's the muffler in place. There's the slip fit on the header, and there's the X in place. And you might be looking at this going, how are you going to get everything connected? And I will tell you that it's going to come out of the header and it's going to go in the back of the X. And then if we think about it from the other side, it's coming from the back of the X under the trans, it's coming out here, and it's going to come up and back into the muffler. So it's going to be a crossover through the X, up and out. And it's the only way that it works to get things far enough away from the starter, because this is going to be turning up and, you know, coming up immediately and then turning backwards. And it we'll be able to get it to come up to clear the tube that's coming in here. So the real issue is how far out this pipe or this tube has to extend in order to get this clearance to come up and into here. So we'll probably end up doing the rear first and then figuring out how far out we'll have to go with that swing to clear underneath that tube. All right, next step of the exhaust fabrication. Martin's here today. Say hi, Martin.
Howdy.
And what we've got is Martin decided that it would be a brilliant idea to buy plumbing, ABS plumbing fixture features or components. And believe it or not, it actually does a great job of modeling everything. So we've now got everything connected. If I take you under the car for just a second, you can see that the X pipe is, we're gonna have to change where this is because we've repositioned it, but the X pipe is in its slider.
What was that kit you bought for your mufflers? For your headers, I mean?
Yeah, so I used the Ice Engine Works plastic modeling kit to do the headers. And as Martin pointed out, this is the poor man's ice. It's the ABS plumbing components. But what's cool about it is the outside diameter of these things is essentially 2.5 inches. It does a great job of modeling the tube size. So it's a short section coming out of the slip fit, a 45 back to a 45 into the X. Coming out of the X at the front, this is just set in there, but it's a 45 up, a 90 back, and into the muffler. Now, obviously, it's taped together. There's some plus and minus stuff going on here, but that is going to be how this thing looks. So it's a little busier, certainly, than it was before, but it looks pretty purposeful. I think I like it. And so now, the X is turning into a practice piece. Everything else in the exhaust system is stainless, and this was all we had lying around at the point in time that it got made. So yeah, we're going to do a do-over on that, but just to make it out of stainless. But the nice thing about it is we know exactly what the dimensions are, or a whole lot more about what the dimensions need to be. So that is going to be the next step to remake the X in stainless, and so that's what Martin's going to go off and do now. All right, so we're back to rebuilding the X, and now this is just a slightly different fixture setup, having lessons learned from version 1. Always use your exhaust pipe as a hammer.
Hey, I haven't used it yet.
What's the problem?
Just want to check your work.
Did you hear that? Under his breath, he said that looks good enough. I'm not sure.
Well,
I'm not sure.
Looks like it could have gone.
Not sure he's going to earn his full pay today with a comment like that.
Looks like it could have gone.
Now, one thing I will point out, you may be looking at the front of that and saying, those don't match. And I would tell you that you are correct, because the supplier of this tube, 2.5 inch diameter, 4 inch radius, is a different supplier than that 2.5 inch diameter, 4 inch radius. So the quality control on some of this stuff is all over the place, and we just have to deal with it. Now, the good news is, once he gets this big mitt out of the way, this part's going to get cut off. So we're not worried about that. We're just worried about everything up to that point. So there's the original steel, mild steel X-pipe that we cranked out to get going. And I was actually thinking I was just going to go ahead and use this, and you know, the system's going to get coated, I don't know, Cerakoted or some kind of heat treatment coating. It might get wrapped under the transaxle as well. But I just figured, you know what, I can't cheap out and have a, you know, an X-pipe in steel and the rest of the exhaust system in stainless. So here's the stainless version, and the good news is my little pin plate worked out just great. I had to swap the spacers. This actually turned out to be just a little bit narrower for whatever reason. Different tubes. The manufacturer, you know, the variance in these things is ridiculous. So if I take you over here and go to put this in the car, as I mentioned, I really don't have to pay attention to much stuff. It just goes in and my little slider plate sets down into the rail system, and then it slides back until it contacts the vice grip stop that we have set down there, and everything's in position. Now, one thing that turned out to be a little bit of a disappointment is, well, disappointment. I was hoping to be able to use 4-inch radiuses on all the tubes, but this is too tight. In order to get the muffler where I want it, moving it forward, I'm gonna have to get a 3-inch radius 90 into there, but not that big a deal. Yeah, and the joys of, you know, toilet plumbing exhaust planning. This stuff worked out great. And yeah, I mean, here you can see, you know, this is the piece of, you know, mocked up length, and these are the 45s that we'll be using, and, you know, get this copied in there, and we'll have stainless exhaust. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. We made great progress. I got the radiator mount done. We got the exhaust system design finalized, assuming we don't change our minds again, but I really don't think we have much of a choice. That X-pipe's got to go underneath. I really didn't want it on top, you know, taking up all this room in the trunk. I have to order some more material, and other than that, we should be all set to get this exhaust system wrapped up in the next episode. So I really appreciate you guys watching. Please like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. We'll be checking in on the kitties from time to time, but not in this episode, so I apologize for that. But we'll look forward to talking to you all again real soon. Everybody take care now. Bye-bye.